A puppy thinks a giant wolf is just "Mama" and plays with her. But what the wolf does next is incredible. Out in the remote wilderness, a fragile little pup crawls right onto the fur of a wounded predator that could end her life in an instant. Instead, something happens no one could explain. But just as this strange bond begins to grow, a dangerous threat lurks beyond the fence, watching, waiting. Why would a predator protect the smallest and weakest creature she's ever met? And when danger finally strikes, will this unlikely family survive or be torn apart forever? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. Lauren's heart thundered in her chest as she stood frozen in the doorway of the recovery pen. Her fingers gripped the wooden frame so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sight before her seemed impossible. Little Cricket, barely bigger than a loaf of bread, was climbing all over the massive form of Willow, as if the wolf was nothing more than an oversized pillow. "Cricket," Lauren whispered, afraid that any sudden movement or loud noise might break the spell and trigger Willow's predatory instincts. But the tiny white puppy, oblivious to any danger, continued her determined ascent up Willow's thick silver-grey fur. Lauren watched in amazement as Cricket finally reached the top of Willow's back, turned around 3 times like she was making a nest, and plopped down with a contented little sigh. The wolf's amber eyes remained half-closed, her massive head resting on her front paws. There wasn't a hint of aggression in her posture. If anything, she looked almost peaceful. "This can't be happening," Lauren muttered to herself, rubbing her eyes as if that might change the scene before her. She had spent years working with injured wildlife, learning their behaviors and respecting their wild nature. Everything she knew about wolves, especially injured ones, told her that Willow should be showing signs of stress or aggression toward the intrusion of her space. But there was Cricket, now sprawled out on her back across Willow's shoulders, her little pink belly exposed in complete trust. The puppy's oversized paws twitched as she dozed, and Lauren could have sworn she saw Willow's ear flick back slightly, as if checking on her tiny passenger. The morning sun streamed through the recovery pen's window, casting warm patches of light across the unlikely pair. Lauren's racing heart began to slow as the minutes ticked by without incident. She found herself sinking down to sit in the doorway, her eyes never leaving the strange tableau before her. "Well, I'll be," she breathed, shaking her head in wonder. The long scar on Willow's flank, evidence of the brutal poaching attempt that had brought her to the sanctuary, seemed at odds with this gentle side of her nature. Lauren had been so certain that the wolf's trauma would make her unpredictable, dangerous even. But here was proof that there was more to Willow than just her wounds and wild instincts. Cricket let out a tiny snore, and to Lauren's continued amazement, Willow simply adjusted her position slightly, ensuring the puppy wouldn't slide off. The wolf's eyes met Lauren's for a moment, and there was something in that amber gaze that made Lauren's breath catch. Not aggression or fear, but something almost like understanding. Lauren remembered how Duke, her faithful German shepherd, had brought Cricket home just days ago. The tiny stray had been dirty and hungry but completely fearless, winning Lauren over despite her initial reluctance to take on another responsibility. Now, watching Cricket's complete trust in Willow, Lauren wondered if perhaps the puppy saw something in others that humans were too cautious to recognize. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Lauren said softly, addressing both Cricket and Willow. The wolf's ear twitched again, acknowledging her voice without showing any signs of distress. Cricket continued to sleep peacefully, her little chest rising and falling in perfect contentment. The scene challenged everything Lauren thought she knew about wildlife rehabilitation. She had always maintained careful boundaries with her charges, knowing that too much familiarity could be dangerous for both human and animal. But here was Cricket, breaking all the rules and somehow making it work. Lauren felt something shift inside her as she watched them, a softening of her own carefully maintained boundaries. Perhaps there was something to learn from Cricket's innocent trust, from Willow's unexpected gentleness. The tiny puppy had managed to bridge a gap that Lauren hadn't even known could be crossed. As the morning light grew stronger, Lauren remained in her spot, witnessing this small miracle in her sanctuary. Cricket eventually stirred from her nap, stretching her little body and letting out a huge yawn that seemed too big for her size. Willow remained perfectly still until the puppy had safely climbed down from her furry perch. When Cricket trotted over to Lauren, tail wagging and clearly pleased with herself, Lauren scooped her up and held her close. "You brave little thing," she whispered into Cricket's soft fur. "You just might be teaching me something important here." Looking back at Willow, Lauren saw the wolf watching them with that same steady gaze. For the first time since the injured wolf had arrived at the sanctuary, Lauren felt something beyond professional concern for her patient. She felt the first tentative stirrings of trust, sparked by the fearless heart of a tiny white puppy who saw no boundaries where others saw walls. Over the next few days, Lauren found herself spending more and more time watching the unusual friendship unfold between Willow and Cricket. The tiny white puppy had made it her mission to be Willow's constant companion, trailing after the wolf like a devoted shadow whenever Lauren allowed supervised interactions. From her observation post on a wooden chair near the recovery pen, Lauren marveled at how carefully Willow moved when Cricket was nearby. The massive wolf would deliberately slow her pace, lifting each paw with precision to avoid stepping on her diminutive follower. When Cricket got too close to her injured flank, Willow would simply shift position rather than growl or snap. "I've never seen anything like it," Lauren murmured to herself one afternoon, watching Cricket attempt to copy Willow's graceful stretching routine. The puppy's uncoordinated efforts made her look more like a wobbly duckling than a wolf. But Willow seemed to watch with what Lauren could have sworn was patience. Even more surprising was how Willow had begun waiting for Cricket before starting her daily walks around the enclosed recovery area. The wolf would pause at the gate, her amber eyes fixed on the path until the puppy came bounding up, all excitement and wagging tail. Only then would Willow begin her careful circuit, matching her stride to Cricket's energetic but erratic pace. Lauren found herself relaxing her strict protocols bit by bit. Where once she had insisted on complete separation between her wild and domestic charges, she now allowed supervised visits, carefully documenting this unexpected rehabilitation development in her journal. "Maybe we've all misjudged what's possible," she wrote one evening, watching Cricket curl up near Willow's uninjured side for an afternoon nap. The spring morning started like any other, with Lauren carrying fresh water to the various enclosures. Cricket trotted alongside her, occasionally darting ahead to check on Willow. The morning sun felt warm on Lauren's face as she climbed the porch steps to fetch more supplies from the sanctuary's main building. That's when she saw it, a piece of paper stabbed into her front door with a hunting knife. Her hands trembled as she pulled the knife free and unfolded the note. The message, scrawled in harsh black letters, made her blood run cold. "We know the wolf survived. We'll finish what we started. No witnesses this time." The paper crumpled in Lauren's shaking hands as the implications hit her. The poachers who had shot Willow had found the sanctuary. They knew she had saved the wolf, and now they were coming to finish the job. Cricket pressed against her legs, whining softly at her obvious distress. Lauren's first instinct was to call the authorities, but her finger hesitated over her phone's keypad. Years of experience with wildlife officials flashed through her mind, their tendency to err on the side of caution, their quick judgment of wild animals as threats. If she reported the poachers, she would have to reveal Willow's presence at the sanctuary. "They'll say she's too dangerous," Lauren whispered, sliding down to sit on the porch steps. "They'll want to put her down, just to be safe." She buried her face in her hands, her thoughts racing. The sanctuary was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where injured wildlife could heal without human interference. Now that safety had been shattered, Cricket's wet nose pressed against her arm, and Lauren looked up to see Willow watching from her enclosure, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her throat tight. The wolf's ears were perked forward, alert to Lauren's distress even from a distance. The sight of them both, the tiny white puppy and the majestic wolf, strengthened Lauren's resolve. She couldn't let the poachers win. She couldn't let fear drive her to betray Willow's trust, not when the wolf had shown such gentleness with Cricket, such capacity for defying expectations. Standing up, Lauren carefully folded the threatening note and tucked it into her pocket. She would handle this herself. She would find a way to protect both her sanctuary and Willow without risking the wolf's life to well-meaning but rigid authorities. The sanctuary was her responsibility, and she would defend it. Cricket pressed against her legs again, and Lauren reached down to scratch behind her ears. "Don't worry, little one," she said softly, her voice growing stronger with determination. "I won't let anything happen to either of you." She looked toward Willow's enclosure, where the wolf still watched with those knowing eyes. The morning sun caught in her silver-grey fur, highlighting the scar that marked her first encounter with human cruelty. Lauren's heart pounded with fear, not just for herself, but for everything she had built here, everything she believed in. But beneath that fear was a steely determination. She had created this sanctuary as a place of healing and second chances. She wouldn't let violence and threats destroy that, no matter what it took to stop them. Lauren couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each morning, she found new signs that the poachers had been prowling around her sanctuary during the night. Fresh boot prints appeared in the soft earth near the fence line, their treaded patterns clear in the morning dew. They weren't even trying to hide their presence anymore. One morning, while doing her rounds, something metallic caught her eye near the front gate. Lauren's stomach twisted as she bent down to examine it, a spent rifle shell, placed right where she couldn't miss it. The brass casing gleamed in the early light, deliberately positioned like a calling card. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the metal still cold from the night air. "This isn't random anymore," she muttered, pocketing the shell. Cricket pressed against her legs, sensing her unease. Even Willow seemed more alert these days, her ears constantly swiveling toward the smallest sounds from beyond the fence. Lauren threw herself into fortifying the sanctuary. She installed new padlocks on every gate and checked them obsessively, once in the morning and again at sunset. She repaired weak spots in the fencing and added solar-powered security lights around the perimeter. Still, sleep became harder to find with each passing night. The rumble of a familiar truck coming up the gravel drive broke through her concentration one afternoon. Lauren recognized her brother Callum's Forest Service vehicle before it came to a stop in front of the main building. He stepped out in his ranger uniform, his expression already set in the concerned frown she knew too well. "Hey, Cal," she called out, trying to sound casual as she met him on the porch. Cricket bounced around his feet, tail wagging, but even her usual cheerfulness couldn't lighten the mood. "Lauren." He gave her a quick hug before getting straight to the point. "I heard about the threats. Why didn't you call me?" She crossed her arms. "Because I knew exactly what you'd say." "You mean I'd say the sensible thing?" Callum's voice rose with frustration. "That keeping an injured wolf here is dangerous enough without adding armed poachers to the mix?" "Willow isn't dangerous," Lauren protested. "You haven't seen how she is with Cricket. She's gentle, Cal. She's healing." Callum ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from countless childhood arguments. "A wolf is still a wolf, Lauren, and these poachers, they're not going to just give up and go away. You need to think about your safety." "So what's your solution?" Lauren's voice had an edge now. "Just hand Willow over to be killed?" "That's what they'll do, Cal. You know that." "Better than you getting hurt, or worse." He gestured toward the sanctuary grounds. "What happens when they come back with more than threats? You're out here alone, Lauren. No backup, no protection." "I'm not alone," she said firmly. "I have Duke, and a German shepherd and a tiny puppy aren't exactly a security team." Callum cut in. "Be reasonable. Call Fish and Wildlife. Let them relocate the wolf somewhere safer, somewhere with proper security." Lauren shook her head, her voice dropping low and determined. "They'll put her down, Cal. One look at that gunshot scar, one mention of poachers involved, and they'll decide she's too high risk. I won't let that happen. She walked to the edge of the porch, looking out toward Willow's enclosure. The wolf was watching them, her amber eyes alert to the tension in their voices. Cricket had wandered over to the fence, pressing her small body against it as if trying to reach her larger friend. Look at them, Lauren said softly. Really look, Cal. When have you ever seen anything like that? A wolf that gentle with a puppy that small? She trusts us. She's healing here. I won't betray that trust. Callum's boots thudded heavily on the wooden boards as he joined her at the railing. Your heart's always been bigger than your common sense, sis. His voice was gentler now, but no less worried. But this time, that big heart might get you killed. Then help me! She turned to him, pleading. You're a ranger. You must know something we can do, some way to catch these guys without involving fish and wildlife. But Callum was already shaking his head. This isn't my jurisdiction, Lauren, and even if it was... He sighed heavily. I can't help you endanger yourself. I won't. The silence that followed felt like a wall building between them. Lauren watched as her brother walked back to his truck, his shoulders tight with worry and disapproval. Cricket whined softly at her feet as the engine started up. I'm sorry, Cal. Lauren whispered as the truck disappeared down the drive, knowing she'd chosen her path. Even without her brother's support, even alone against whatever came next, she would protect both Willow and Cricket. The sanctuary was more than just a place. It was a promise of safety to every animal in her care. She wouldn't break that promise, no matter what it cost her. Lauren sat on an overturned bucket near Willow's enclosure, her chin propped in her hands as she watched the unlikely pair before her. The morning sun warmed her back while Cricket, fearless as ever, played her favorite game with the wolf. The tiny white puppy would dart in, nip at Willow's ears, then bounce away with a delighted yip. Instead of showing irritation, the massive wolf simply tilted her head, allowing the puppy better access to her ears. I never would have believed it if I wasn't seeing it with my own eyes, Lauren murmured to herself. Cricket's latest nip was a bit too enthusiastic, but Willow just huffed softly, a sound that seemed almost like a laugh. The wolf's amber eyes held none of the wildness Lauren had expected when she'd first brought the injured animal to the sanctuary. Instead, they watched Cricket with what could only be described as gentle amusement. As the morning wore on, Cricket's energy began to fade. The puppy's playful attacks grew slower until she finally flopped down next to Willow, tiny pink tongue lolling out. Lauren held her breath, still not entirely used to what happened next. With careful movements, Willow curled her large body around Cricket, creating a warm, protective circle of silver-grey fur. The puppy snuggled closer, letting out a contented sigh before drifting off to sleep. Lauren shook her head in wonder. Everything I thought I knew about wolves, she whispered, watching as Willow rested her chin protectively over Cricket's small form. The textbooks she'd studied, the wildlife seminars she'd attended, none of them had prepared her for this level of gentleness from a wild predator. The sound of a distant crow calling snapped Lauren back to reality. She needed to do her morning perimeter check. Standing up, she grabbed her walking stick and whistled softly for Duke. The German shepherd appeared from around the corner of the barn, alert and ready. Come on, boy, she said. Let's make sure our fence line is secure. They started their usual route, Duke trotting ahead while Lauren checked each section of fencing. The morning dew had dried, making it harder to spot fresh tracks, but she searched carefully anyway. About halfway around the property, Duke suddenly stopped, his ears pricking forward. Lauren followed his gaze to a gap in the underbrush she hadn't noticed before. Pushing aside some branches, she discovered what looked like an old game trail. The narrow path wound down through the trees, and even from where she stood, she could hear the gentle sound of running water. How did I miss this? She wondered aloud, following the trail with Duke close behind. After about 50 yards, the path opened onto a small riverbank. The spot was beautiful. A gentle curve in the river had created a quiet pool, perfect for animals to drink from. In other circumstances, she might have been pleased to find such a peaceful place. But now, looking at the clear line of sight from the water to her sanctuary's fence, Lauren felt her skin prickle with goosebumps. This secluded spot would make a perfect place for someone to watch the sanctuary unnoticed. Or worse, to set up an ambush. Duke growled softly, and Lauren reached down to touch his head. "You smell something, don't you, boy?" The dog's hackles were slightly raised, suggesting others had been here recently. The poachers must know about this trail, probably had known about it for weeks while they studied the sanctuary's layout. Lauren scanned the riverbank carefully, noting how the surrounding trees provided plenty of cover. A person could hide here for hours, watching through the fence, waiting for the right moment. The thought made her stomach churn. Willow's enclosure, while not visible from this exact spot, was close enough that someone could quickly get into position once they entered the sanctuary grounds. She took out her phone and snapped several pictures of the trail and riverbank. The photos might not help much, but if anything happened, at least there would be a record of this vulnerable point in their defenses. Looking down at the soft earth near the water's edge, she spotted what she'd been dreading: boot prints, fresh enough that the edges were still clearly defined. "They've been here," she said quietly to Duke. "Recently, too." The dog's continued low growling confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just about random threats anymore. The poachers were systematically studying her sanctuary, learning its weaknesses, planning their approach. Lauren felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. Willow, who had learned to trust enough to let a tiny puppy play with her ears. Cricket, who slept so peacefully curled against the wolf's warm fur. Both of them were counting on her, whether they knew it or not. She took one last look at the riverbank before turning back toward the sanctuary. This hidden trail represented everything she'd been afraid of, a way for those who meant harm to get too close, too easily. But knowing about it now meant she could plan, prepare. She wouldn't let this peaceful spot become the place where everything went wrong. The night wrapped around the sanctuary like a thick blanket, broken only by the soft glow of Lauren's desk lamp. She rubbed her tired eyes, trying to focus on the stack of paperwork before her. A movement on one of the security camera monitors caught her attention. She leaned forward, squinting at the grainy black and white image. Her heart stopped. There, near the corner of the fence line, was Cricket's tiny white form, visible even in the dim lighting. The puppy was pawing at something, a small gap where the fence met the ground, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. Before Lauren could push back her chair to run outside, Cricket squeezed through the opening and disappeared into the darkness beyond the fence. "No, no, no," Lauren whispered, her hands shaking as she reached for her coat. But another movement on the screen made her freeze. Willow had noticed Cricket's escape too. The wolf's massive form appeared in the camera's view, her silver-grey coat almost glowing in the moonlight. Lauren's breath caught in her throat as she watched Willow approach the fence. Instead of showing agitation, the wolf moved with deliberate care, her nose low to the ground as she tracked Cricket's scent. To Lauren's amazement, Willow didn't try to break through the fence or show any signs of aggression. Instead, she paced along the barrier, her movements purposeful. The wolf's head turned sharply, and Lauren switched to another camera view just in time to see Cricket bouncing back towards the fence, apparently having decided her adventure wasn't worth continuing alone. "Come on, sweetie," Lauren whispered to the screen, her heart still racing. "Come back inside where it's safe." As if hearing her words, Cricket approached the gap again. But this time, Willow was there, using her body to guide the puppy back through the opening. The wolf's massive head lowered, gently nudging Cricket's behind until the puppy was safely back inside the sanctuary grounds. Only then did Willow relax, giving Cricket's face a quick lick before shepherding her away from the fence. Lauren sank back in her chair, her mind whirling with what she'd just witnessed. This wasn't just tolerance or even friendship. This was active protection. Willow had recognized the danger of Cricket being outside the fence and had acted to bring her back to safety. "That's it," Lauren said aloud. "Come back inside where it's safe." straightening up as an idea took shape. She'd been so focused on protecting Willow and Cricket separately, she hadn't considered how their bond might help them all survive what was coming. The next morning, Lauren began her experiment. She brought Cricket with her to Willow's enclosure, but this time she stayed closer than usual, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Good girl, Willow," she said softly when the wolf appeared. "Watch over Cricket for me." Willow's ears twitched at Lauren's voice, her amber eyes moving between the human and the puppy. Cricket, oblivious to any tension, trotted right up to the wolf and began her usual playful routine. But this time, Lauren noticed how Willow kept glancing back at her, as if checking for approval. "That's right," Lauren continued, taking a careful step closer. "You're such a good protector." Over the next few hours, Lauren worked on establishing a pattern. She would call Cricket to her side, then praise Willow when the wolf guided the puppy back. Each time, she used the same gentle tone, the same words of encouragement. Willow seemed to understand the game, becoming more responsive to Lauren's voice. By afternoon, Lauren felt confident enough to try something new. She waited until Cricket had wandered a short distance away, then called out firmly but quietly, "Willow, bring Cricket." The wolf's response was immediate. She got up from where she'd been lounging, trotted over to Cricket, and used her nose to herd the puppy back to Lauren. The tiny white dog thought it was all great fun, yipping happily as she bounded alongside her larger companion. "Good girl," Lauren praised, her voice thick with emotion. "Such a good girl, Willow." The wolf held her gaze for a long moment, and Lauren saw something there she hadn't noticed before. Intelligence? Yes, but also trust. Willow was choosing to work with her, using their shared love of Cricket as a bridge between their worlds. Lauren reached into her pocket and pulled out a treat she'd brought along just in case. She tossed it gently toward Willow, who caught it with surprising delicacy. Cricket immediately tried to steal the treat, making the wolf huff in that almost a laughing way of hers. Watching them together, Lauren felt a surge of hope. The poachers might know the sanctuary's layout, might even have found ways to get close, but they didn't know about this. They couldn't have predicted that a wounded wolf would form such a strong bond with a tiny puppy, or that this connection would create a new line of defense. "Together," Lauren said softly, watching as Cricket curled up against Willow's side for her afternoon nap. "We'll protect each other." The wolf's amber eyes met hers again, and this time, Lauren was sure she saw understanding there. The morning sun painted long shadows across the sanctuary grounds as Lauren worked with Willow, her heart swelling with pride at their progress. Cricket bounced around them, her white fur gleaming like fresh snow against the dusty earth. Over the past few days, the wolf had grown increasingly responsive to Lauren's voice commands. "Willow, guard!" Lauren called out softly, pointing to Cricket. The wolf's ears perked forward, and she moved smoothly to position herself beside the puppy. Lauren felt a smile spread across her face as she watched Willow nudge Cricket away from a thorny bush with gentle precision. "Good girl," Lauren praised, reaching for the treat bag at her hip. The wolf's amber eyes tracked her movement, but there was trust there now, not the wariness of their early days together. Even from 20 feet away, Lauren could see how Willow's posture had changed. More relaxed, more assured. A sharp crack split the air. Lauren spun toward the sound, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw the sanctuary's main gate swing open, its electronic lock disabled. The security camera's red recording lights were dark. The power was out. Two men burst through the entrance, their worn hunting gear and cruel expressions telling Lauren everything she needed to know. The poachers had finally made their move, and they'd chosen broad daylight to do it. "Get the wolf!" The taller one barked, raising a rifle to his shoulder. His companion, stocky and sneering, moved toward Lauren with frightening speed. "No!" Lauren shouted, but rough hands grabbed her arms, spinning her around. The ground rushed up to meet her as the stocky poacher shoved her down. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and she tasted dirt and fear. "Stay down if you want to live," the man growled, pressing a knee into her back. Lauren turned her head just enough to see the other poacher advancing on Willow, his rifle steady in his hands. Cricket's high-pitched bark cut through the tension. The puppy, unaware of the danger, ran toward the men, her tiny form a bright splash against the dark earth. Lauren's heart seized with terror. "Cricket, no!" she screamed, struggling against the weight pinning her down. The poacher cursed and pushed harder, making her gasp in pain. The man with the rifle swung his weapon toward Willow, who had gone completely still, her fur bristling. The wolf's eyes weren't on the gun, though. They were fixed on Cricket, who was still charging forward with puppy bravado. Lauren felt tears burning in her eyes. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd protected, was about to be destroyed. She could lose them both, Willow and Cricket, in one horrible moment. The thought of Cricket's trusting nature leading her straight into danger, of Willow's rehabilitation ending in violence, made her chest ache with a pain deeper than physical. "Just take the shot," the man holding Lauren down called to his partner. "We ain't got all day." The rifle gleamed in the sunlight as the poacher steadied his aim. Lauren could see his finger tightening on the trigger, could see Willow's muscles bunching as if preparing to move. The moment stretched like heated glass, ready to shatter. Time seemed to slow as Lauren watched Cricket toddle closer to the armed men, still barking her fierce little puppy bark. Willow remained frozen, her amber eyes calculating. The wolf's previous gunshot wound stood out starkly against her silver-grey fur, a reminder of what these men were capable of. Lauren felt the poacher's grip tighten on her shoulders as he sensed her renewed struggle. The man with the rifle took another step forward, his boots crushing the grass Lauren had walked on just minutes before while training. The sanctuary's peaceful morning had transformed into a nightmare, and Lauren was helpless to stop it. "No," she whispered, the word barely a breath. Everything she'd built, everyone she loved, Cricket's innocent trust, Willow's hard-won progress, balanced on a knife's edge. The poacher's finger curled around the trigger, and Lauren's world narrowed to that single, terrible motion. In that frozen instant, Lauren realized that all her careful plans, all her protective measures, had led to this moment. The sanctuary's fences, her security cameras, even her brother's warnings, none of it had been enough to keep the violence at bay. Now she might lose everything she'd fought so hard to protect, and the thought made her blood run cold. The rifle's metal surface caught the sunlight, throwing a harsh glare across the scene. Lauren could see every detail with cruel clarity. Cricket's small form, still charging forward. Willow's tense muscles, ready to spring. The poacher's determined expression as he lined up his shot. The moment hung suspended, like a drop of water before it falls, waiting for gravity to assert itself. Lauren's fingers dug into the dirt beneath her, and she felt the earth's solidness mock her helplessness. All her work with Willow, all the progress they'd made, seemed to fade against the brutal reality of the rifle's barrel. The trust they'd built, the bonds they'd formed, would it all end here, in violence and loss? The sanctuary's usual peaceful sounds had died away, leaving only the heavy breathing of the men, Cricket's continued barking, and the thunder of Lauren's heart in her ears. Everything she cared about balanced on the edge of destruction, and she was powerless to stop it. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Lauren's scream died in her throat as she watched Cricket dart forward, her tiny white form suddenly between the rifle and Willow. Time seemed to freeze as the bullet whizzed past where Willow had been standing just seconds before. In that same heartbeat, Willow moved. The massive wolf launched herself forward with explosive power, her silver-grey fur bristling like storm clouds. She slammed into the gunman with the force of a battering ram, driving him backward into the metal fence. The rifle clattered to the ground as he crumpled with a sharp cry of pain. "You stupid—" The stocky poacher yanked Lauren up by her arms, his fingers digging into her flesh. She fought against his grip, but he dragged her towards the tree line, his boots leaving deep marks in the soft earth. The sanctuary's woods loomed dark and threatening ahead of them. Lauren's heart pounded against her ribs as adrenaline flooded her system. She kicked backward, trying to catch his knee, but his grip only tightened. Her shoulders screamed in protest as he twisted her arms higher behind her back. "Stop fighting!" he snarled in her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Your wolf won't be able to help you once we're in the trees." Cricket's frightened yips echoed across the sanctuary grounds. The sound pierced Lauren's heart. Her brave, foolish puppy had no idea of the danger she was in. But the little dog's barking had another effect. Willow's head snapped around at the sound. The wolf's amber eyes locked onto Lauren and her captor. Without hesitation, Willow whirled away from the fallen gunman and charged toward them, her powerful legs eating up the ground. Her teeth flashed white in the sunlight, and a deep growl rumbled from her chest like distant thunder. The poacher's grip loosened for just a fraction of a second as he registered the incoming threat. Lauren felt his moment of fear in the tremor of his hands, saw it in the way his shadow jerked against the ground. That instant of uncertainty was all Willow needed. The wolf didn't slow down. She crashed into the poacher's side with her full weight, forcing him to release Lauren to keep from falling. Lauren stumbled forward, catching herself on her hands and knees as she heard the man's startled shout behind her. "Call it off!" he yelled, scrambling backward as Willow advanced on him, her hackles raised and teeth bared. "Call your wolf off!" Lauren pushed herself to her feet, her palms stinging from the impact with the ground. Her heart was still racing, but now triumph mixed with the fear. She looked at Willow, the wolf she'd once thought too dangerous to trust, standing guard between her and danger. "She's not just my wolf," Lauren said, her voice shaking but strong. "She's protecting her family." As if to prove the point, Cricket bounded over to Lauren, her little tail wagging despite the chaos. The puppy pressed against Lauren's legs, then turned to face the poacher alongside Willow, adding her high-pitched bark to Willow's deep growl. The gunman by the fence was still down, groaning and clutching his side where Willow had struck him. His partner backed away slowly, hands raised, his earlier confidence evaporated in the face of Willow's fierce protection. "This isn't over," he spat, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. He kept backing up until he reached his fallen companion, never taking his eyes off Willow. The wolf took a single step forward, and both men flinched. Lauren's legs felt weak with relief as she watched the poachers retreat through the broken gate, leaving their rifle behind in their haste to escape. The moment they were out of sight, Willow's posture relaxed. The wolf turned to Lauren, her amber eyes now soft with concern. "Good girl," Lauren whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Such a good, brave girl." Willow padded over, pressing her warm bulk against Lauren's side. Cricket bounced between them, yipping happily as if they'd just played a wonderful game. Lauren sank her fingers into Willow's thick fur, feeling the strong heartbeat beneath. The wolf who had once been a stranger, who Lauren had feared might be too wild to save, had just saved them all. Lauren looked down at her unlikely family, a fierce wolf and a fearless puppy, and felt something settle in her chest. The trust she'd built with Willow, the connection she'd watched grow between wolf and puppy, had proven stronger than violence. In protecting both Lauren and Cricket, Willow had shown that some bonds transcended the expected boundaries between wild and tame. Cricket snuggled against Willow's front legs, completely unaware of how close they'd all come to disaster. The puppy's innocence had been the catalyst that brought them together, and now Willow's courage had kept them safe. Lauren wrapped her arms around Willow's neck, burying her face in the wolf's fur as the last of her fear melted away. The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the tense aftermath. Lauren's heart leaped as a familiar park ranger truck burst through the broken gate, kicking up dust in its wake. Behind the wheel, Callum's face was set in grim determination as he slammed the vehicle to a stop. "Lauren!" he shouted, jumping out with his service weapon drawn. His ranger uniform was muddy at the knees, suggesting he'd been tracking on foot before this. The first poacher was still staggering to his feet, dizzy from Willow's impact. Before he could fully regain his balance, Callum crossed the distance in 3 long strides and tackled him back to the ground. The man's breath left him in a whoosh as Callum's weight drove him into the dirt. "Stay down!" Callum ordered, quickly securing the man's hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. The poacher groaned but didn't resist. The second poacher had frozen in place, eyes darting between Callum's weapon and Willow's bared teeth. He raised his hands higher, finally seeming to accept that he was cornered. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Callum commanded, his voice hard with authority. The stocky man complied, sinking slowly to the ground. Willow watched his every move, her amber eyes never leaving his face. Lauren's legs were shaking as the adrenaline began to fade. She leaned against Willow's solid presence, grateful for the wolf's steady support. Cricket pranced around them, still treating the whole incident like an exciting game. "Are you hurt?" Callum called out to Lauren, keeping his attention on the subdued poachers. "I'm okay," she managed, her voice rough with emotion. "How did you know to come?" Callum secured the second poacher before answering. "Found fresh boot prints near the river trail this morning. Wrong type for hikers, and they were trying too hard to stay hidden. I followed them here as fast as I could." He looked up at Lauren, and she could see the fear he was trying to hide. "I almost wasn't fast enough." The sound of sirens grew in the distance as Callum radioed for backup. Within minutes, the sanctuary was filled with police cars and more ranger vehicles. Officers took statements while the poachers were led away in handcuffs, their faces twisted with frustrated anger. "We found their truck hidden off the access road," one officer reported. "Loaded with illegal hunting equipment. These two have been on our radar for months." Lauren watched as the authorities gathered evidence, including the abandoned rifle. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she stroked Willow's fur. The wolf had remained close to her side, tolerating the increased activity with remarkable calm. When the chaos finally began to settle, Callum walked over to where Lauren stood with Willow and Cricket. His face was troubled as he looked at his sister. "Lauren, he started, then had to clear his throat. "When I saw those tracks this morning, when I realized they were heading here..." He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. "I'm all right," Lauren assured him softly. "Thanks to Willow." Callum's gaze shifted to the wolf. Willow met his eyes steadily, her earlier aggression completely gone. Cricket chose that moment to wedge herself between Willow's front paws, yawning as if the excitement had worn her out. "I was wrong about her," Callum admitted, watching as Willow gently nosed the puppy. "When you told me about the threats, I was so sure keeping her here would only put you in danger. But she protected you. Protected both of you." His voice grew rough with emotion. "If she hadn't been here today..." Lauren reached out and squeezed her brother's arm. "But she was here, and now those men won't be able to hurt any more animals." Callum nodded, then slowly extended his hand toward Willow. The wolf considered it for a moment before stepping forward to sniff his fingers. Her tail gave a single, gentle wag. "Thank you," Callum said quietly to the wolf, "for saving my sister." Lauren felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her brother finally accept what she had learned over the past weeks. That Willow was more than just a wild animal. She was family. Cricket, apparently deciding the moment needed lightening, bounced up to lick Callum's hand. Her tiny pink tongue against his fingers made him laugh, breaking the tension. "Well," he said, scratching behind Cricket's ears, "I guess I should have trusted your judgment. You always did have a way of seeing the good in others, even when they came with sharp teeth and a scary reputation." Lauren smiled, remembering how frightened she'd been when she first took in the injured wolf. "Sometimes the scariest things just need a chance to show their true nature," she said, watching as Willow settled down in the grass, with Cricket snuggled against her side. The sanctuary grounds were quieting now as the last of the police vehicles departed. The broken gate would need fixing, but Lauren felt stronger, not weaker, for what had happened. With her brother's support, Willow's protection, and Cricket's fearless heart, she knew her sanctuary was safer than ever. The morning dew sparkled on the grass as Lauren watched Willow and Cricket play in the sanctuary's main enclosure. The wolf's movements were strong and fluid now, showing no trace of the injury that had first brought her here. The scar along her flank had healed into a silver line beneath her fur, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Lauren's heart felt heavy as she checked off another box on her rehabilitation chart. Willow had met every recovery milestone, exceeding expectations. Her strength was back, her wound was healed, and her ability to hunt had been confirmed by the rabbits she occasionally caught in the enclosure. There was no medical reason to keep her any longer. I knew this day would come, Lauren murmured to herself, gripping her clipboard tightly. The law was clear. Rehabilitated wildlife had to be released back into suitable habitat once they were healthy enough to survive. It was the right thing to do, the ethical thing, but knowing that didn't make it any easier. Cricket darted between Willow's legs, yipping excitedly as the wolf pretended to chase her. Their morning play sessions had become a ritual, one that Lauren would miss terribly. She watched as Willow deliberately slowed her pace, careful not to overtake the puppy, showing the same gentle restraint she'd demonstrated since day one. They're quite a pair, aren't they? Callum's voice startled her. He had been spending more time at the sanctuary since the incident with the poachers, helping repair the damaged fence and upgrade their security systems. They are, Lauren agreed softly, not taking her eyes off the unlikely friends. I don't know how Cricket will handle it when Willow goes back to the wild. Callum finished for her. He placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. She'll adjust. Dogs are resilient that way, and you gave them both something special. Time together that neither was supposed to have in the first place. Lauren nodded, blinking back tears. I've been working with the Wildlife Service to identify the best release site. There's a protected area about 50 miles north of here, well away from hunters but with good prey populations. They've approved it for next week. Callum squeezed her shoulder. That's good thinking. Far enough that she won't try to find her way back, but similar terrain to what she knows. He paused, studying her face. You're doing the right thing, Lauren. I know, she whispered, but it still hurts. Over the next few days, Lauren spent every moment she could with Willow and Cricket. She took dozens of photos, trying to capture their unique bond, the way Cricket would curl up in the curve of Willow's body during afternoon naps, how Willow would gently mouth Cricket's ear when the puppy got too rambunctious, the peaceful moments when they simply sat together watching the sunset. The night before the scheduled release, Lauren couldn't sleep. She slipped out to the enclosure, finding Willow alert and watching the stars. Cricket was snoozing nearby, tucked into her usual spot against the wolf's warm fur. I hope you understand, Lauren said softly, settling down beside them. You were never meant to stay here forever. You belong out there, running free with your own kind. Her voice cracked slightly. But I want you to know that you changed everything. How I see wolves, how I run this sanctuary, even how I trust my own judgment. You proved that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. Willow's amber eyes met hers, seeming to hold wisdom beyond human understanding. The wolf shifted slightly, making room for Lauren to lean against her side. Cricket stirred briefly, then settled back to sleep, sandwiched between them. I'm going to miss this, Lauren admitted, running her fingers through Willow's thick fur. Cricket will too, though I hope she's young enough that the memory will fade gently. She took a shaky breath. But I'll always remember. Always. The wolf's tail thumped once against the ground, and she turned to press her nose briefly against Lauren's cheek. The gesture, so unexpectedly tender, made the tears Lauren had been holding back finally spill over. They sat together through the quiet hours of the night, sharing one last moment of connection before their paths would diverge. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Lauren gathered her courage. Tomorrow would bring the bittersweet task of saying goodbye. But for now, she simply let herself be present in this moment, surrounded by the unconditional love of two creatures who had taught her more about trust and courage than she'd ever expected to learn. Cricket snuffled in her sleep, paws twitching as she chased dream rabbits. Willow's steady breathing was a comfort in the pre-dawn stillness. Lauren closed her eyes, committing every detail to memory, the warmth, the peace, the profound sense of rightness despite the approaching farewell. She had done what she set out to do, healed an injured wolf and given her a second chance at life. That would have to be enough. The morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for saying goodbye. Lauren clutched Cricket's leash in one hand and Willow's tracking harness in the other as they made their way along the worn dirt path. Each step felt heavier than the last, leading them toward the forest's edge where their paths would finally separate. Cricket bounced along beside them, oblivious to the weight of the moment, while Willow padded silently on Lauren's other side. The wolf's fur gleamed silver in the early light, her powerful frame moving with the easy grace of complete healing. She looked ready to return to the wilderness where she belonged. At the tree line, Lauren knelt in the damp grass. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the tracking harness that had helped her monitor Willow's recovery. The wolf stood perfectly still, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on Lauren's face as she unbuckled the straps. "There you go, girl," Lauren whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She couldn't resist running her hands through Willow's thick fur one last time, memorizing the feeling. "You're free now." Cricket whined softly, sensing the shift in mood. She pressed against Willow's leg, and the wolf bent to touch her nose to the puppy's head in what looked remarkably like a goodbye. With deliberate steps, Willow moved toward the trees. The shadows between the trunks seemed to reach for her, ready to reclaim their wild child. But at the very edge, she paused. Turning her head, she looked back at Lauren and Cricket, her gaze holding them for a long moment. In that pause, Lauren saw everything they had shared: trust, protection, and a love that defied natural boundaries. Then, like mist dissolving in morning sun, Willow melted into the forest. The branches swayed in her wake, and then grew still. Lauren stood there long after the wolf disappeared, Cricket warm against her leg. Finally, she turned back toward home, her cheeks wet but her heart full. On the porch, she settled into her favorite chair, and Cricket immediately curled up beside her, offering silent comfort. The sanctuary felt different now, emptier yet somehow more complete. Lauren watched the tree line where Willow had vanished, reflecting on how much had changed since that first day when Duke had brought home a tiny white puppy. She had learned to trust not just Willow, but her own instincts. Every time she had chosen to believe in the wolf's gentler nature, she had been proven right. Cricket sighed contentedly in her sleep, and Lauren smiled through her tears. They had given Willow back her freedom, but she had given them something equally precious: an unshakable faith in the power of trust and love to bridge even the wildest of divides. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.